Hello there. So this is a Patreon only update, but I may make it available to the rest of my subscribers when all the issues in this are resolved, if they ever get resolved. So what is this video? Well, it's a house purchase update. I really only feel comfortable sharing it with you lot, select group of people who I trust, because you wouldn't be pledging to the channel if you had malintent. So I feel comfortable sharing this information with you. So I can't quite remember how I'd left this, what information I gave you last about my purchase and sale. I think it was that I was waiting for, exchange of contracts and completion dates. And that was probably about 6 weeks ago, wasn't it? Because it's probably around the time of my birthday. Yeah, well, I'm still in exactly the same position. Now, that's a little bit of a exaggeration. So basically, we haven't exchanged contracts, but we do now have a completion date for the sale and my purchase. But obviously, without exchanging contracts, you ain't going to be completing. So the situation is this. Regarding my purchase is ready to go. Okay, and it's been ready to go for about a month, I would say, probably maybe even over a month. We're ready to exchange. The sellers of that property are desperate for me to complete. They have given me a date. It's all been driven by the date of the 10th of September that they gave me, which as of today is a week on Friday. That was all smooth sailing. And, partly because I didn't want to rock the boat. There were some things about the property that are potentially in need of a little bit of care and attention. So I think the owners have nicely replaced the boiler, which was kind of a bit decrepit, which is good. But the power shower doesn't work. My property survey came back and said that there was a little bit of rot on an exterior panel of the roof, which could extend elsewhere into the roof. But I didn't want to rock the boat because I felt like I got a good price on the property, and I didn't want to annoy my sellers. That's just my personality, really. I didn't want to be difficult or make them give them any cause to think, oh well, maybe we should just stick it on the market and sell it to someone else. And I mean, also, I wouldn't have been so easygoing had it been subsidence in the property or Japanese knotweed in the garden. But as it happens, a power shower can be replaced for £100. So I'm not too worried about it. As a slight aside to do with the rot in the roof, it's just another facet of the house sale or purchasing process that gets on my nerves, the survey that you get done. So I had a middle of the road survey, cost about £600 on this property, and 99% of the comments about the property I'm buying were really run-of-the-mill, uninteresting. Everything's fine, basically. You get like a traffic light system and the walls are in green condition and, the garden's all right or something. And then I got a handful of things that were kind of orange, amber and red to do with, well, one of them was woodwork, because there's a glass panel in the lounge that isn't CE marked, so if you fell through it, it could shatter and hurt you. Doesn't meet the modern safety standards. Well, you're not going to not buy a house because of that, are you? Because you can just replace it yourself. And, how many times do you fall through a door? That sort of thing's a bit daft. But one of the things, the only thing that really kind of caught my eye was this comment about the condition of the roof in the property. But and this was months ago now that I had this survey done, right at the beginning of the process. I didn't take that any further because in another part of the survey report, it stated that the age of the property was 1999. And I thought, well, this property is 22 years old. That's really not old at all. And if there is any rot, it's all going to be superficial. So I ignored it. But then when I eventually received my what's called the property report from my solicitor, detailing all the things like the environmental searches and responses to inquiries from the seller's solicitor, that sort of thing, I also received the deed, I think it's called, that tells you, it's all kind of written in old English sort of thing, and it's got some restrictive covenants, like you're not allowed to display a flag out the front of your property. But one of the things that eventually caught my eye, because I didn't quite believe it, is that the property wasn't built in 1999. The property was built in 1978, which personally I was a little bit relieved about, because I didn't want to buy a kind of newer build bungalow without proper brick walls on the outside and interior brick walls. That's just my personal preference. Certainly brand new properties these days have got a bit of a bad reputation for their build quality, and because they're wooden framed, if they're not built well, then you can get serious problems with rot, and they can cost a lot of money down the line, or they're expected to cost a lot of money in decades to come. If they're built well, then you're probably absolutely fine. But anyway, that's another ramble. I was quite happy that this property was 1978. But, of course, it does mean that actually the property isn't 22 years old. It's, I can't work it out now because my maths isn't that good, but it's at least another 20 years old. Well, it's like 43 years old or something, isn't it? I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous that the property surveyor would put that date on there. It's clearly not a 90s bungalow. It confused me when I saw it on the report. And of course, it's meant that I've made a decision about the roof early on, which is kind of inaccurate. I mean, if the roof is 40 odd years old and there's a little bit of a sign of rot on the outside, then you never know really now what's in the rest of the roof. It's still not going to affect my decision regarding the purchase, because I think I still got a good price. Even if it needed re-roofing entirely, it's still a good price for this bungalow. So so that's the situation with the purchase. It's ready and raring to go. And in fact, my sellers of my property that I'm trying to buy, they are hoping to move into rental accommodation. So they're waiting to sign a rental agreement, for which they need me to exchange my contract, so they know that they're actually going to sell their property, which is completely fair enough. And I kind of spoke with them early on in the process and convinced them that I was in a very good situation, having sold my property, and that my property would sell far in advance of completion of their sale, which, as I'm about to tell you, is not the case. So the other side of it is my sale of my property, which is a leasehold property, okay, which means that it's not freehold, which means that there is technically a landlord that you pay a nominal ground rent to of £10 a year. I sold this property back in May this year to an international buyer, somebody from China, in actual fact. Somebody who's sending their kid, well, that's a bit of an insult really, their adult offspring off to the UK to study at a university. Now, initially, I'm going to probably ramble quite a lot here. Now, initially, I sold it, and I was keen to complete my sale as quickly as possible, because I wanted the money so that I was secure and ready to proceed for my purchase. Now, the first obstacle I had to overcome was convincing my estate agent of this fact. They waited a further 2 weeks after I'd accepted the offer to instruct on my sale, to actually contact my solicitor and say, yes, go ahead with the sale. Took them some convincing, because they're so used to people being in a chain and wanting to wait until they'd found somewhere to buy before they could proceed with their sale. They kind of just ignored what I said and didn't progress with the sale. Now, I was in a unique position in that I was able to sell my property, move my stuff into my parents' garage and into storage, and move in with my parents at any time so that my sale could complete smoothly and chain-free. So eventually, I convinced my estate agent to do that, and the process began. Then, this is becoming quite a history of the whole thing, but I think it's going to give you some good context, and at the very least, maybe it will be good ASMR to get you off to sleep. So I instructed on my sale, and it started to kind of progress. I didn't hear anything for a few weeks. Then I received a phone call from my solicitor or their assistant saying, "Oh, we need to get the management pack. It's going to cost £150." And it was kind of a little bit of a rush, and they were a bit sort of, "Oh, we didn't really realise that we needed it," kind of thing. Well, not like that. I mean, it is a professional solicitors firm, but they were a little bit like, "Oh yes, we need the management pack," which I kind of thought 3 or 4 weeks into the process possibly could have been something that you requested on day one. That's just me. I like to pride myself on my efficiency. But anyway, I paid that, and that was going to take 3 or 4 weeks to come back. And sure enough, I think it did take 3 or 4 weeks to come back. The searches were done as well at about the same time, and then the contents of those documents were then given to my sellers. Sorry, not my seller, my buyer. My buyer is in China, so there's obviously a time zone thing. If you don't reply to questions by sort of midday at the latest, then you're going to have to wait a whole 24 hours to continue that line of questioning. Eventually, some inquiries came in response to the management pack. This was in about June time, which, if you remember rightly, here in the UK, or maybe you're not aware at all, but it was the end of the first period of stamp duty holiday that we had here. So you have to pay a tax when you sell a house, a certain proportion of the value. There was a holiday here, so you didn't have to pay anything, I don't think, in stamp duty before the end of June. So I got an email from my solicitor saying, if it's all right, kind of thing, I'm not going to do anything with your property until the end of June, because I've got loads of completions to do that are really urgent. So I was thinking, well, that's only like another week and a half, so that's fine, I'll just leave it. So then 2 weeks into July, things started to get a little bit frenetic, and I got communication to the effect of, your solicitor hasn't replied to any of the inquiries that have been made. And so I was a little bit like, okay, what's going on? And as it turned out, my solicitor not only waited until the end of June, but then didn't reply, didn't even kind of look at the inquiries, so I understand, until the middle of July. Ordinarily, that might not be a problem. You just respond to the inquiries, get the information you need, and answer them. But in this case, because it's a leasehold property, getting the answers to questions about the lease and things like that require an answer from a third party, namely the landlord. Now, in this case, those questions had a minimum lead time of about 3 weeks. So you can see kind of where I'm going with this. Middle of July already, 3-week lead time. And in fact, we didn't know the lead time, actually, at that point. There was a kind of drama at that point, which was that the questions had been asked of the landlord, and they'd had no formal response other than an automated email acknowledgement. So I kind of tried to chase it myself. Eventually, I got confirmation that we could get a response within 3 weeks, probably by me pushing it in the way I did. And I felt that my solicitor could have been a little bit more proactive at that point and kind of chase these things properly themselves, not just chaser emails that sit in an inbox and don't go anywhere. So those inquiries took ages to come back, and at that point it sort of felt like it was my side of the chain, or my side of the process, that was slowing things up, and that we were a little bit responsible because we'd taken weeks to respond to the inquiries. But eventually, the responses to the inquiries came in. The next branch of problems really started at that point, which were that we then received more inquiries. So I received inquiries that I had to answer myself, several inquiries about, say, the parking where my property is. Where can my client park? Well, wherever it's legal to park, as long as you've got a parking permit. And then another inquiry. How do you get a parking permit? You apply to Norwich City Council for a parking permit. My solicitor then got me to mark on a map where they could park. Just seemed a little bit excessive. And anyway, I thought, well, maybe this is it. But then more questions came that required an answer from the landlord. Obviously raised my blood pressure and concerned me, because every question to the landlord had a minimum turnaround, so it seemed, of 3 weeks. Again, there's questions about when those inquiries were actually dealt with, how soon after being received were they actually processed. I feel like possibly a week or two, which is, not on when you know that there's a slow link in the chain, i.e. the landlord. So more questions were asked. As of maybe 2 weeks ago, we're getting to sort of close to present date, so don't worry, the story will end soon. There were a handful of questions, inquiries to the landlord that were still outstanding. But as of, I think, late last week, those questions were finally answered. My solicitor seems to have sort of pulled his finger out, because we're getting very close now to the completion date, and I think we're starting to get pressure from my seller's side to actually exchange contracts. Otherwise, that side of the transaction could potentially fall through. Yeah, late last week they were answered. The state of play last week was that finally the property report, so this is the report that the solicitor compiles and sends to their client for my property, was going to be sent to my buyers in China via email, and crucially along with the contract that they have to sign. Some solicitors do have a way of taking a kind of proper electronic signature, and I don't just mean signing something in Paint and emailing it. There's a proper identity confirming signature you can do, but my understanding is that in terms of signing deeds and things for houses, you have to have a wet ink signature. Maybe there are ways around it, but I understand it's a little bit of a legal minefield. So the problem at this point, as of sort of Thursday last week, is that the property report has gone to the buyers in China along with the contracts. Those contracts need to be signed and returned as soon as possible. But express post from China, unless you're going to pay about £200, is going to take 3 to 5 working days to get back to England. Now, it's important to say at this point that the act of signing those with a witness in China doesn't actually contractually oblige you to buy a house. You're only contractually obliged when those contracts have been formally exchanged by solicitors over the phone. So, this is a kind of slow link in the chain that, you can minimize without making yourself legally obligated to buy a house. Okay, so it should have just been signed and returned. And it may well have been signed and returned, but I don't know yet, and I'm hoping to find out today. So now we are at yesterday. So yesterday I received an update from my solicitor, which is Tuesday, which is not the first working day of the week, but that's because Monday was a bank holiday here in the UK. So it is actually the first working day here in the UK. So I've received an email with 2 further inquiries from my buyer's solicitor. I believe there were actually, I've forgotten, there were more inquiries last week. They wanted me to confirm that I'd never breached any of the restrictive covenants on my property, and that I had never had any difficulty exercising my rights as a leaseholder. Okay. So I answered those. I said no to both of them. Yesterday, I received a letter from a buyer's solicitor. There were 2 questions. The first was, you've breached a restrictive covenant in having a satellite dish on your property. So I've been a little bit stitched up there, I feel. I've kind of been asked about a restrictive covenant. I've said I haven't breached them. I did actually read them and check them, but obviously not thoroughly enough. Now, I can just buy an indemnity policy, which costs £105, yippee. Or I suppose I could have had it taken down, but in the interest of time, I decided to just buy the indemnity policy. Interestingly, every property on that road virtually has also got a satellite dish. So then the kind of slightly more, I don't know, the comment that kind of concerned me a little bit more was from my buyer saying, we've received our property survey and it says that the boiler will need repair very shortly. When was it last inspected? Is there an ongoing maintenance policy on the boiler? Now, this question's a bit weird because we're at the 11th hour here. We are so close to exchanging contracts, and all of a sudden the condition of the boiler is in contention, if you like. Well, firstly, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the boiler, and I want to know really what the property surveyor's qualifications are to be able to clairvoyantly predict that the boiler is about to require a repair. Absolutely extraordinary comment. And I'm a little bit frustrated because obviously I've already provided the inspection report for the boiler. Now, it was in October last year. I was also able to say that the boiler was inspected again in March this year, which it was, for a repair, incidentally. And the boiler is working. In fact, at this very moment, I'm using it to heat my property. So I'm a little bit frustrated, but that's not really the kind of real cause of my frustration. As you probably may be coming to in your own mind, I'm now starting to wonder whether or not these questions are kind of moving us towards a position where the buyer is going to ask for some kind of discount. This is typically called gazundering. So there's gazumping, which is where you find a house that's already had a sale price agreed, and then you offer more money and try and, it's called gazump, the previous person who had their offer accepted. Gazundering is where you get to the 11th hour in a house purchase, and then you virtually sort of blackmail the seller into accepting a lower price, because what are they going to do at that point? Cancel the whole thing and do it all over again? I'm wondering whether we're working towards that. I don't know. Anyway, today, hopefully, I'll receive an answer. So I responded to these questions, basically, and I was polite and factual, but I didn't want to say, I firstly admit that there's anything wrong with the boiler, because there isn't, and I don't want to proactively offer any money for the boiler because, I don't want to kind of give any money to the buyer needlessly. So I kind of suggested you could do what I do, which is have boiler breakdown cover, which costs 20-something quid a month. If the boiler breaks down, it gets repaired. When the boiler needs its yearly service, it gets its yearly service. But I mean, that's the responsibility of the person who buys the house. The boiler is working. Will it be working in 6 months? I don't know. If I bought a car now, I don't know if it would be working 6 months. That's the risk you take. I think caveat emptor, buyer beware. So, anyway, I mean, hopefully it's being positive about it. It's just them being thorough and reading something on their survey and, rightfully wanting some kind of resolution to this issue that they found. We shall see. Today is going to be probably quite an important day with the house purchase and sale. I'll keep you updated. I'm not sure whether or not how often I will be able to upload YouTube videos to the channel, over the coming weeks until completion has taken place. But I will continue to post here anyway, and I'm sorry this video is so late, but I have just been very stressed, and this is a week off work for me, so I've kind of been focusing on myself a little bit, but I don't want to let you guys down. So thank you for your continued support, and I shall see you next time. Maybe you might see me. You might just hear my voice. I don't know. See you next time for another video.